Welcome to Let's Read. This is meant to be basically an interactive audiobook where I'll be reading chapters of some of the books I like or am interested in. And since they tend to be older books, we'll be using some research tools, mostly AI, in order to get some better understanding of what's happening and get some deeper context. So, we're going to start off with this book on Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle. I'm going to be referencing the Google Books version that I will pull up right now. And so it starts off with the first lecture, The Hero as Divinity, Odin, Paganism, and Scandinavian Mythology. First, let's just see why Carlyle is writing this and get a little bit more of the historical context. So, why did Thomas Carlyle write on heroes and hero worship? And what is the historical context? Right, so written in 1841, a protest against the direction the 19th century was heading. If you read Carlyle at all, his history is really lively and poetic. He's one of my favorite authors for that reason. Yeah, and he's basically challenging the Industrial Revolution at this time. I think there was a great democratic revolution around lots of areas in Europe in 1848, so he's somewhat predicting that. And he'll go through Odin, Muhammad, Dante, Shakespeare, Martin Luther, John Knox, Samuel Johnson, Jean Jacques Rousseau, and Robert Burns, maybe? I don't know. I'm not too familiar. And then Oliver Cromwell and Napoleon. But we're going to start with Odin right here, and let's just get into it. We have undertaken to discourse here for a little on great men, their manner of appearance in our world's business, how they have shaped themselves in the world's history, what ideas men formed of them, what work they did on heroes, namely, and on their reception and performance, what I call hero worship, and the heroic in human affairs. Too evidently, this is a large topic, deserving quite other treatment than we can expect to give it at present. A large topic indeed, an illimitable one, wide as universal history itself. For as I take it, universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, these great ones, the modelers, patterns, and in a wide sense, creators of whatsoever the general mass of men contrive to do or to attain. All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of the thoughts that dwelt in the great men sent into the world. The soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, were the history of these. Too clearly, it is a topic we shall do no justice to in this place. All right, so we have essentially our thesis statement here, if we want to get all high school about it, that history, the history of the world, is the history of great men, the biography of what men did in their specific place and time. And really, it's a challenge to the thought that, well, history is just driven by the circumstances and any man could have stepped up at this point or that point. That's a big thing Carlyle will challenge in general. And he'll basically say that great men shape and drive history. It's not, somewhat predestined as others might think. One comfort is that great men, taken up in any way, are profitable company. We can look, however imperfectly, upon a great man without gaining something by him. He is the living light fountain, which it is good and pleasant to be near. The light which enlightens, which has enlightened the darkness of the world, and this not as a kindled lamp only, but rather as a natural luminary shining by the gift of heaven, a flowing light fountain, as I say, of native original insight, of manhood and heroic nobleness, in whose radiance all souls feel that it is well with them. On any other terms whatsoever, you will not grudge to wander in such neighborhood for a while. These six classes of heroes, chosen out of the widely distant countries and epochs, and in mere external figure, differing altogether, ought, if we look faithfully at them, to illustrate several things for us. You know what? Before we even move on there, I think it's probably a good idea to just take some notes. Take some notes on what we're actually learning in this book. So we'll call it on Heroes Notes. If you don't know about that docs.new trick, you're welcome. On Heroes Notes. And then we're dealing with lecture one to start off. And then basically, right, anytime you're taking notes about something you're reading, you want to try to write it in your own words so it sticks a little bit better in your memory. So here we're going to say history is the biography of great men. History is not fully, let's just say, is not shaped by external circumstances as much as it is shaped by the men or women who changed, let's say, society. Let's go with society. Why not? All right, so we're starting off there. That's a good point. And then the second thing Carlyle is saying here is that it'll be profitable to think about the great men of history. It'll be worthwhile, even if we can't get fully into the subject. But I don't think that's worth taking a note on. But good to recognize this point either way. So let's go back. The six classes of heroes, chosen out of widely distant countries and epochs, and in mere external figure, differing altogether, ought, if we look faithfully at them, to illustrate several things for us. Could we see them well, we should get some glimpse into the very marrow of the world's history. How happy could I, but in any measure, in such times as these, make manifest for you the meanings of heroism, the divine relation, for I may well call it such, which in all times unites a great man to other men, and thus, as it were, not exhaust my subject, but so much as break ground on it. At all events, I must make the attempt. That's an I kind of don't. I didn't pick it up on the first one. What he's saying there. Maybe we need a different version of this book if I'm going to be copying and pasting text. Yeah, let's go for a different version of the book. Sorry about that. Project Gutenberg's usually not the best version. Let's see. All right, we'll give it a shot. Let's do the EPUB. Yep, this isn't going well. Yeah, just put it in my Google Drive. Looks like I probably can. All right. Yeah, let's go for it. Oh, I'll be better prepared next time. We're learning on the fly here. Yeah, all right. That's not working. Unbelievable how hard it is to just read a book. I definitely have this book on Kindle. Right, we're moving along. Boom. Nope, we want to click that. We want to click that. Could it be going worse? Oh, that'll come up soon enough. Yeah, looks like it starts on this page. All right. So let's go for that. Let's just make this bigger. But now we can essentially take our notes, what we're looking for, and start to put it into Gemini. All right. How happy could I, but in any measure? Boom. Finally found it. All right. So this is what I like to do. What this passage from the book means. Not that it would be so hard to kind of dig into it more and figure it out myself, but I like to see if there's additional context that I'm potentially missing. So we'll give it a shot here. Yeah, right. Like in times such as these, he's referring to the era as spiritually bankrupt. Let's read the passage over again since it took so much time. How happy could I, but in any measure, in such times as these, make manifest to you the meanings of heroism, the divine relation. For I may well call it such, which in all times unites a great man to other men, and thus, as it were, not exhaust my subject, but so much as break ground on it. At all events, I must make the attempt. All right, times such as these, mechanized society, the Industrial Revolution, right? He's referring to. This is the point of interest in the divine relation, which at all times unites great men to other men. This is the core of his philosophy. He isn't just saying great men are cool or important. He's saying the hero is a conduit to the divine. All right, so now I'm kind of remembering this. Carlyle essentially believes in hierarchies on Earth, and so the man who best represents God's will on earth deserves to lead. So that's what the divine relation is referring to. Now let's read the second part. The bond is sacred. When ordinary people recognize and follow a hero, it is a spiritual act. He believes that hero worship is the strongest thread holding human society together. Without it, he thinks society would collapse into a mess of selfish individuals. That's the interesting part, which, as a modern American, is always hard to digest. The idea that you should be following somebody else. It's somewhat against our nature, but that's what makes Carlyle interesting to read in my specific context. All right, let's keep moving along in the book. Times such as these may find at all events I must make the attempt. It is well said in every sense that a man's religion is the chief fact with regard to him, a man's or a nation of men's. By religion, I do not mean here the church creed, which he professes, the articles of faith, which he will sign, and in words or otherwise assert. Not this wholly, in many cases, not this at all. We see men of all kinds, of professed creeds, attain to almost all degrees of worth or worthlessness under each or any of them. This is not what I call religion. This profession and assertion, which is often only a profession and assertion from the outworks of the man, from the mere argumentative region of him, if even so deep as that. But the thing a man does practically believe, and this is often enough without asserting it, even to himself, much less to others. The thing a man does practically lay to heart and know for certain concerning his vital relations to this mysterious universe and his duty and destiny there. That is, in all cases, the primary thing for him, and creatively determines all the rest. That is his religion, or it may be his mere skepticism, and no religion. The manner it is in which he feels himself to be spiritually related to the unseen world or no world. And I say, if you tell me what that is, you tell me a very great extent of what the man is, what the kind of things he will do is. Of a man or of a nation we inquire, therefore, first of all, what religion they had. So here the point is again simple, but it's powerful. A person's religion is not simply what they profess, it's how they express their spiritual relation to the world through action. So that's our second point, right? Or we can think of points like kind of rolling in a logical accordance here. The first point is that history is the biography of great men. The second point is that, well, those great men, they're heroes. What a hero represents is the closest spiritual relation to God's will on earth. And then our third point is that we know a man's spiritual relation to earth, to God's will, by his actions, not what he professes. So I think that's why basically we'll go from Odin to Muhammad to Napoleon, men who are all expressing different religions, but in some way are getting close to that divine relation. Was it heathenism, plurality of gods, mere sensuous representation of this mystery of life, and for chief recognized element therein physical force? Was it Christianism, faith in an invisible, not as real only, but as the only reality, time through every time, through every meanest moment of it, resting on eternity, pagan empire of force, displaced by nobler supremacy, that of holiness? That's a pretty powerful part on what Christianity is. Christianity is like supremely a belief in the invisible as the only reality, the spiritual realm as the only thing that truly matters, and that every single moment in reality rests on eternity, which is a point Carlyle will go back to over and over again. Um, Basically, saying the present moment is in between two eternities, which is why it can feel so trapping in a lot of ways. Was it skepticism, uncertainty, and inquiry, whether there was an unseen world, any mystery of life except a mad one? Doubt as to all this, or perhaps unbelief and flat denial. Answering of this question is giving us the soul of the history of the man or nation. The thoughts they had were the parents of the actions they did. Their feelings were parents of their thoughts. It was the unseen and spiritual in them that determined the outward and actual. Their religion, as I say, was the great fact about them. This part I really find interesting. The thoughts were the parents of the actions that they did. You just wonder how true that is. If you think of the psychologist Jean Piaget, he talks about how kids play games and then sort of abstract the rules after. A lot of different things in psychology and about rationalizing will tell you, well, people rationalize after their actions what their thoughts are. But here, Carlyle is saying the thoughts are the parents of the actions, they drive the actions, and more specifically, their thoughts about what is the world made of, what is the spiritual realm, and how does it relate to Earth. So that reminds me more of a book like The Power of Positive Thinking, where thinking positively can force positive action. So just an interesting axiom for Carlyle to rest on. And, it's probably true in certain senses, but then in other senses, like how Piaget talks about play, it doesn't seem to be true. So just something to keep in mind that once well, all is known. Well, wait, in these discourses, limited as we are, it will be good to direct our survey chiefly to that religious phasis of the matter, that once known well, all is known. We have chosen as the first hero in our series Odin, the central figure of Scandinavian paganism, an emblem to us of a most extensive province of things. Let us look for a little at the hero as divinity, the oldest primary force of heroism. Yeah, so if heroism is representing God's will on earth, it makes sense that the first version of a hero would have been seen as a god. And that's what Carlyle is going to get into with Odin. Surely it seems a very strange looking thing, this paganism, almost inconceivable to us in these days. a bewildering, inextricable jungle of delusions, confusions, falsehoods, and absurdities covering the whole field of life. Carlyle would probably be surprised to see the resurgence of paganism on the internet, but I think that's because life has become so complex. People really do rely on power dynamics, and paganism gives people an outlet for that. A thing that fills us with astonishment, almost if it were possible, with incredulity, for truly it is not easy to understand that sane man could ever calmly, with their eyes open, believe and live by such a set of doctrines, that men should have worshipped their poor fellow man as God, and not him only, but stocks and stones and all manner of animate and inanimate objects, and fashion for themselves such a distracted chaos of hallucinations by way of theory of the universe. All this looks like an incredible fable. Nevertheless, it is a clear fact that they did it. Such hideous, inextricable jungle of misworships, misbeliefs, men made as we are, did actually hold by and live at home in. This is strange, yes. We may pause in sorrow and silence over the depths of darkness that are in man, if we rejoice at the heights of purer vision he has attained to. Such things were and are in man, in all men, in us too. Some speculators have a short way of accounting for the pagan religion, mere quackery, priestcraft, and dupery, say they no sane man ever did believe it, merely contrived to persuade other men, not worthy of the name of sane, to believe it. It will be often our duty to protest against this sort of hypothesis about men's doings in history, and I here on the very threshold protest against it in reference to paganism and to all other isms by which man has ever for a length of time striven to walk in this world. I like this part a lot. People, when they talk about religion now in a way more scientific society, will always say, well, religion was just to trick the masses so that groups in power could remain in power. It was just to get different ignorant people in order to control them. But Carlyle is pushing back on that. And right, people would even say that about paganism in his time when people were definitely more religious than they tend to be now. And then he goes to this: they have all had a truth in them, or men would not have taken them up. So important to remember. You can't just straw man other people's religions. There's some truth in there. You have to assume people are genuine. I love that filter on reality and on history. Quackery and dupery do abound in religions, above all in the more advanced decaying stages of religions. They have fearfully abounded, but quackery was never the originating influence in such things. It was not the health and life of such things, but their disease, the sure precursor of their being about to die. Let us never forget this. It seems to me a most mournful hypothesis, that of quackery giving birth to any faith, even in savage men. Quackery gives birth to nothing, gives death to all things. We shall not see into the true heart of anything if we look merely at the quackeries of it. If we do not reject the quackeries altogether as mere diseases, corruptions, with which our and all men's sole duty is to have done with them, to sweep them out of our thoughts as out of our practice. Man everywhere is the born enemy of lies. It's hard to even interpret that part. Man everywhere is the born enemy of lies. It's really just a moral calling. It's hard to say that, well, that's certainly a fact. I'm always blown away by that moral conviction in Carlyle. So yeah, let's just keep going. I think it'll reveal itself more what he's talking about there. You probably almost have to read all his works to fully understand that point, but that's sort of the main point in Carlyle throughout his entire bibliography. I find Grand Laminism itself to have a kind of truth in it. Read the candid, clear sighted, rather skeptical Mr. Turner's account of his embassy to that country, and see They have their belief, these poor Tibet people, that Providence sends down always an incarnation of himself into every generation. At bottom, some belief in a kind of pope. At bottom, still better, belief that there is a greatest man, that he is discoverable, and that once discovered, we ought to treat him with obedience, which knows no bounds. This is the truth of Grand Lamanism. And you can think of like the Dalai Lama, right? The discoverability is the only error here. The Tibet priests have methods of their own of discovering what man is greatest, fit to be supreme over them. Bad methods, but are they so much worse than our methods of understanding him to be always the eldest born of a certain genealogy? This is another thing that's great in Carlyle. He's pushing back on his own society. His Christian countries, they look at Grand Lamanism, which is what the Dalai Lama would be a part of, and say, how foolish that they think they can find who the person most related to God is in their world at any given time. So silly, so backwards thinking. Meanwhile, all the countries in Europe are just saying, well, the son of the last king is probably the greatest man and fit to lead. Obviously, that did not work out. So he's really great to call out sort of what's happening in his own society. Well, he's critical of many other societies as well, but I think in modern times when people think of Thomas Carlyle, they don't see this other part of him where he's not just saying, I'm right, everything's wrong. He's self critical of even the things that he believes in. Because he's not really a monarchist, but he's definitely not a Democrat. He sees democracy as a way to change a system into something better. It's some sort of like accountable monarchy that he's focusing on, and that his modern day disciples have certainly landed on for sure. But he's basically, if you went through all his works, you would see he doesn't really have the answer. He's just a critic in some capacity. Alas, it is a difficult thing to find good methods for. We shall begin to have a chance of understanding paganism when we first admit that to its followers it was at one time earnestly true. Let us consider it very certain that men did believe in paganism, men with open eyes, sound senses, men made altogether like ourselves, that we had been there, should have believed in it. Ask now what paganism could have been. All right, we got a comment. Things like king's government succession are necessary because biblical people aren't here anymore. I don't really know how to interpret that. If you could maybe simplify that explanation. I'm not saying government is not necessary or that there shouldn't be changes of leaders. And I also don't get the reference to people in the Bible. But if you can explain, I'll read it. I'll read it again. And the point that Carlyle is getting at here is like, if we're going to interpret paganism, if we're going to interpret why people worshipped Odin, let's assume they were genuine. Let's not just say this was to control people, this was to confuse people. Let's assume they were genuine and see how far we get. That's sort of the corpus that we started off with at the beginning, right? It's profitable to take a look at the great men of history. And in order for it to really be profitable, let's assume the people who followed them were genuine, starting with Odin, whose followers saw him as actual divinity here on Earth. Another theory, somewhat more respectable, attributes such things to allegory. It was a play of poetic minds, say these theorists, a shadowing forth in allegorical fable, in personification and visual form, of what such poetic minds had known and felt of this universe, which agrees, add they, with a primary law of human nature, still everywhere observably at work, though in less important things. That what a man feels intensely, he struggles to speak out of him, to see represented before him in visual shape, as if with a kind of life and historical reality in it. Now, doubtless there is such a law, and it is one of the deepest in human nature. Neither need we doubt that it did operate fundamentally in this business. The hypothesis which ascribes paganism wholly or mostly to this agency, I call a little more respectable, but I cannot yet call it the true hypothesis. What we're going to see Carlyle do here is basically say when a religion is dying, it is a farce for control. A little bit before that, it somewhat becomes an allegory. People don't believe it. But at first, people don't believe it, but they see the value in it. But at first, it is a very genuine belief. And this happens somewhat in modern times with Christianity too. You see a lot of people like Jordan Peterson referring to Christianity somewhat as allegory and saying, well, look how useful these ideas are, but maybe I don't necessarily believe in the literal fact of what happened. I'm just reading another comment. I believe in Christianity, but I have to admit my other mythologies are way cooler. There's more gods and stuff, which is cooler than just one god. Two, if you consider Jesus, I guess. Yeah, it's cool to look at all the different gods, right? I mean, that's why people like Marvel movies and stuff like that nowadays. It's essentially a bunch of different gods represented and fighting in the arena. Somebody like Carl Jung would have said, when the gods fight, it's like ideas organizing reality fight. And at some point, Christianity just swept over all of those ideas in the West and completely took over. So it is interesting to think about gods as ideas in battle. I like that frame of thinking too. I do enjoy that. Where were we? Culture hypothesis. Think, would we believe and take with us as our life guidance an allegory, a poetic sport? Yeah, you wouldn't throw your life towards an allegory the same way these people did, right? You have to earnestly believe something to give your life for it, unless there's a state of coercion. Not sport, but earnest is what we should require. It is a most earnest thing to be alive in this world. To die is not sport for a man. It's definitely tough to read Carlyle because he reminds you how serious reality is. Right? Like, man is the born enemy of lies. To die is not sport for a man, and it'll happen to us all. Man's life never was a sport to him. It was a stern reality, altogether a serious matter to be alive. I find, therefore, that though these allegory theorists are on the way towards truth in this matter, they have not reached it either. Pagan religion is indeed an allegory, a symbol of what men felt and knew about the universe, and all religions are symbols of that, altering always as that alters. But it seems to me a radical perversion and even inversion of the business to put that forward as the origin and moving cause when it was rather the result and termination. Yeah, so this is the path of religions, right? As it becomes an allegory, it's on its way to be terminated. Another comment from Rose. Rose, appreciate the engagement. Does hell actually have 9 circles, rings, or is that fiction? You're asking the wrong guy. I have no idea. Never been. But if you find out, certainly let me know. It seems like important information to have if we could figure that out. Altering, but it seems to be a radical perversion, even inversion. Put that forward as the origin of movie cause. So you can also see Carlyle, while he's super pro Christianity, he has a lot of atheism in him, right? He's kind of talking about all religions being allegories. An allegory, a symbol of what men felt and knew about the universe, and all religions are symbols of that, altering always as that alters. So religions are representations of what men feel about the universe, but that's always changing. So there's not one stuck religion, and that would apply to Christianity too. So that's why a lot of critics of Carlyle will say he was an atheist. When you read him, it's hard to get that sense. You kind of have to read between the lines to get that sense because he invokes a lot of power of Christianity in the writing. To get beautiful allegories, a perfect poetic symbol, was not the want of men, but to know what they were to believe about this universe, what course they were to steer in it, what in this mysterious life of theirs they had to hope and to fear, to do and to forbear doing. The Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, and I've never read that, but that is supposedly one of the classic books. The Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, and a beautiful, just, and serious one. But consider whether Bunyan's allegory could have preceded the faith it symbolizes, right? Allegory comes after faith, never before. So when you're critiquing other religions, don't say they were built as a farce, they were just an allegory. That's at the tail end. It is a, what would you call it, an anthropological mistake to assume that's the origin. I'm sure it's true for some, but these big sweeping movements, it's probably not true for. The faith had to be already there, standing, believed by everybody, of which the allegory could then become a shadow. And with all its seriousness, we may say a sportful shadow, a mere play of the fancy, in comparison with that awful fact and scientific certainty which it poetically strives to emblem. The allegory is the product of the certainty, not the producer of it, not in Bunyan's nor in any other case. For paganism, therefore, we still have to inquire whence came that scientific certainty, the parent of such a bewildered heap of allegories, errors, and confusion. How was it? What was it? Surely it were a foolish attempt to pretend explaining, in this place or in any place, such a phenomenon as that far distant, distracted, cloudy imbroglio of paganism, more like a cloud field than a distant continent of firm land and facts. It is no longer a reality, yet it was one. We ought to understand that this seeming cloud field was once a reality, that not poetic allegory, least of all that dupery and deception was the origin of it. Men, I say, never did believe idle songs, never risked their soul's life on allegories. Men in all times, especially in early earnest times, have had an instinct for detecting quacks, for detesting quacks. Let us try it. Let us try if leaving out both the quack theory and the allegory one, and listening with affectionate attention to that far off confused rumor of the pagan agents, we cannot ascertain so much as this at least, that there was a kind of fact in the heart of them, that they too were not mendacious and distracted, but in their own poor way true and sane. We're going to pause there. It's a good place to pause. And essentially, Carlyle is saying when we're looking at this past religion, let's not strawman it. Let's assume it earnest and genuine. So I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully, this is interesting to watch and useful if you're interested in these types of stories, but definitely let me know. All right. Thanks so much.